You've heard that saying, timing is everything, right? In life, timing is everything. In divorce, it's really important. If you are not in the right time frame, be that early or late, you could mess yourselves up terribly. And then the kissing cousin to timing is legal advice. So we have here to have this discussion another mediator. We have Alice Shikina of Shikina Mediation and Arbitration. And I want you to hear two mediators talk about how timing affects the way we can help as mediators and what we've seen, just so you don't make the same mistakes. So you're going to divulge everything, right, Alice?
Sure.
Okay, timing is everything. So my initial thing is taking too long from from the time you make a decision to divorce. This is a very, for me, it's a very sensitive time period when you make the decision to divorce and when you start filing. I did the TEDx talk on that, and I looked at a year to get your emotions in order if you can, if you have a year. I mean, this is all based on the individual situations. But if you don't have anything extraordinary you're dealing with, you need to come into the legal divorce with less emotion. Just give me your take on that to start.
So it's interesting that you talk about that because obviously someone's timing on filing and getting through divorce is very much linked to their emotions, right? Absolutely. But here's the thing, while it is linked and people are thinking about their own timing, right, of filing, what they might not consider is if they have blindsided their spouse after they've already thought about it for a year or 2 years or 5. I have no idea how long people consider divorce, and they silently consider it, they quietly consider it, they research it, they get emotionally prepared. So they've had a long time to emotionally prepare. They may file for the divorce, and all of a sudden, if your spouse is blindsided, meaning they were never, ever, ever expecting it, they are now going to have to start processing it, and they may not move at your timeline because now they are not filing the required paperwork. They are not doing financial disclosures because they are not ready to go through the process. So I think it's important to remember that even though you are saying, hey, I'm taking my time, I think I'm ready, I've been considering it for a year or two, you need to also consider that when you file it against your spouse, they might drag it out for another couple of years because now they're behind you in terms of processing.
Couldn't agree with you more. And so that's an excellent point that you make. You should never file for divorce if the other person doesn't know that you're going to do it because they will become enraged if that is their natural way of dealing with things, and that doesn't benefit you. And why would you want to blindside? Why do you think somebody would blindside the other person, Alice?
I think it's because they want to escape the marriage and maybe they feel like they've mentioned it before. I mean, it's happened to me, right? Where it becomes like just a tactic when you're arguing, saying, if I don't get my way, I'm going to get a divorce. So it loses all its teeth. And maybe when you start to mean it, the other person doesn't realize you've started to mean it because you've already, it's kind of like the boy who cried wolf.
Yes.
So if you ask for the divorce too many times, it no longer has meaning and it just becomes like a fighting tactic. So it's possible that you file it because now you've meant it for the past 10 times, but your spouse doesn't take you seriously. They're like, oh yeah, you've been threatening divorce for the past 2 years. Why should I take you seriously, right? So
Yep.
then people have a tendency to blindside their spouse because they've been threatening for the last 5 times, like seriously, whereas the last 50 times it was nothing happened.
Okay, that is such another excellent point because while you were talking, I'm thinking, oh yeah, I can think back on these cases where this happened. I think if I may, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, I know it's both men and women, and I have had both, but I'm thinking of more women right now who feel powerless, who have wanted to engage their spouse in a divorce conversation, but the other spouse just didn't want to, enjoyed whatever the situation was in the marriage, and didn't want to listen to the other spouse. Quite often, the wife saying, "I'm not happy. Can we talk
Exactly.
about this? I'm not happy." Okay, so these are excellent points. You and I both get, I think, more amicable situations. Don't we get people that really don't want to hire attorneys
Yeah, frequently, yes. Yes.
frequently? Yeah, and once in a while, my clients have to leave and go to attorneys. They tried the mediative process, the amicable process, but they just needed teeth. They needed stronger legal teeth. They needed somebody to speak for them and really guide the process down the road. And maybe they had extraordinary things like, the children. Maybe there was a spouse that had substance abuse, and no, that spouse cannot have the children on their own, or that much. So, yeah, there's couples that have serious situations that maybe you really do need to be in court and with a judge managing the decisions. But okay, timing is everything. So now we have a couple that, all right, they're ready to go. They've had the talk, and okay, let's separate. At least let's live in different houses. Here's one situation. And so you do that, and then time goes by, and time goes by, and life gets in the way. Somebody loses their job, and then that's stress on the other spouse who's working. And then there might be children, which there are. And then there might be a house that has to be dealt with. So one spouse is paying rent. Maybe they're also paying for a portion, if not all of the house. What do you do? Oh, and then nobody's going for legal advice.
Right.
With all of that in mind, nobody's getting legal advice because I found, and let me know if you find the same, they think it's disloyal. They think there's something wrong with getting legal advice. When you have a couple in front of you, have you already ascertained before you schedule the mediation whether they've gotten legal advice or not?
I usually do. But it's not so much for my purposes that I ask. I ask because most of the time people, it's not about being disloyal. People do not realize that there's a difference between getting legal advice and litigation. So when they hear the word lawyer, they're actually translating that word lawyer to litigation.
Mm-hmm.
And so for your listeners, I just want to point out the difference. So litigation means you're suing each other and you're spending like tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars to fight the entire thing in court. So you're fighting for every single dollar, everything that's mine, and it's very ugly, it's very emotionally draining, and it's very detrimental to your family, your children, right? If you get legal advice, you're just trying to find out, like, what would I get if I were to go to court? You're not fighting for it. You're just getting information, right? Like, for example, so people might ask, what kind of information? What would spousal support be? What would child support be? If I'm going to do a buyout, what are some of the legal considerations that I need to be aware of when I go into this business deal, right, where there's a buyout going on? So I tell people the way to discern between the kind of lawyer you're looking for versus the kind of lawyer you're not looking for is I say, if a lawyer says, I'm happy to give you legal advice, please pay me a retainer of $5,000 or $10,000. I tell them, don't hire that attorney because they're going to try to get you to fight. You want to find someone, because it's not every family law attorney that offers hourly legal consults, so that you can just pay by the hourly, go get the information you need, and then come back and mediate it with that information. But if someone says, give me 10 grand, I can pretty much guarantee they're going to try to spend that 10 grand, right? They're going to try to spend it, and they're going to try to get you riled up. Oh, you deserve more. Oh, this is like ridiculous. You need to fight for it. And let's make, lots of phone calls, lots of emails, and all of a sudden you're going to get another 10 grand, and you're going to be like, what did I spend my first 10 grand on? And they're going to say, oh, phone calls, all these phone calls that you've had with me, you spent your money. So I do want to tell people there's a difference between litigation and hiring lawyers for legal advice.
And then with that, knowledge is power. And what does that mean? I'm not talking about power to get over on your soon to be former spouse, power to feel comfortable making decisions.
Exactly.
So when people look at me and say, well, Judy, why should we? We just want to do it together. And I say, well, how are you going to make decisions about the length of spousal support? Do you know what that means? In California, Alice and I are both in California. Every state has slightly different rules. And there, I think Texas doesn't even have spousal support. Correct me if I'm wrong. But alimony spousal support is really not in every single state. But we watch TV and movies, and this is
Right.
how we supposedly get our information. And so, well, what do you mean there's no spousal support? Or what do you mean we have a short-term marriage if you're in California or a state like this, where spousal support is only half the length of the marriage? You've been separated 7 years, you have a 6-year marriage, and you've been funding, if you're the higher wage earner, you've been funding your spouse beyond anything required. Now, if you're okay with that, fine. Again,
Right.
I think Alice is like me. We're not looking to change how you want to do things. But when somebody gets in front of me and starts talking in a way that is not at all cogent with law, I just say, it doesn't sound like either of you have gotten legal advice, have you? Well, no, Judy, why should we? So that we could have a different conversation in mediation, so that your expectations are correct. And then if you want to go beyond the expectations, fine. I'm just here to help you have the conversation that works for both of you so that you can create a settlement that works for both of you. But knowledge allows you to understand whether you're taking way too long, because taking too long can serve to hurt you. So I agree with Alice. I look at a year. When both spouses understand that there's going to be a divorce, I call it the emotional divorce. I say, take a year, because it seems to be that way, where you just do the best you can, get your legal advice, pay the bills, deal with the kids, and then let's start the legal divorce, which means the filing. And what you said is very true. There are attorneys that will say, I want a $5,000, $10,000 retainer for a 20-minute conversation about one thing that you're asking about. There are attorneys that will even break down the hour into pieces
Yep.
and just charge you for that. And so Alice and I both have a list of attorneys that are right for the amicable divorce.
Exactly.
Exactly. Okay, so what happens, Alice, when you see that a couple has taken 8 years from the time there were two households to now, and one person has been paying most, if not all, of the bills? The other person may have drained the 401k or the IRA just to make their ends meet. Like, what do you do? What are your options?
Yeah. So when you take a long time, what happens is, especially if you own a home, let's say that you own a home, but one spouse has moved out, but nothing is going on because they're just renting. Frequently, what I see is that there's no paper trail. And there's all of this, like, well, I was paying for this, I was paying for that, but there's no actual documentation. And can you imagine trying to try to create documentation for 8 years in the past of who was paying the mortgage full time? And if you don't have a business agreement covering the house, even if you're still married, if one person moves out and then they just sort of like verbally make some kind of agreement, like, oh, we'll both pay the mortgage, or, oh, I'll pay the mortgage while I live, whatever it is, they make these verbal agreements. Then like a long time goes on, right, before they actually get a divorce. Now it's really difficult to tell, is this a 50-50 split or not? Because everyone's just dumping in money sort of arbitrarily into the house. It's hard to tell, and there is no contract to say we are now in a business, this is how we're going to divide up the money, this is who's going to pay for what. There's nothing clear. It's just people just dumping in money as they go along. And now you have years that people cannot go back and recreate because they may not remember all the different things. Someone might say, oh, well, I was project managing the kitchen remodel while you were gone, and I feel like the kitchen remodel that I paid for, I'm going to be able to get back out when we sell the house. And the other side might be arguing, saying, I never approved that kitchen remodel, or I don't want the kitchen remodel, or who knows, whatever is happening. So it becomes very, very murky to be able to parse apart the dollar amount that's yours. That just becomes like just very messy and could potentially lead to litigation.
Yes.
And then there's other things, such as I recently had a couple where there was some stock and they had waited for 2 or 3 years. And so he wanted to go back to the 3-year ago mark to say, here's your stock. And she had spoken to a lawyer and said, the lawyer said, no, you lost out on all the gains, so you should get half of today's worth. And he was in shock because it was like over $500,000 more than he thought it would be, right? Wow. Because her lawyer said, by the way, all those years that you were not able to invest that money, well, he's invested it for you, so he owes you half of what it's worth today. So even if it might be true, you can imagine what kind of an emotional shock it was for him.
Yes.
When he thought he owed a certain amount, and then it turns out after recalculating and rethinking this logic that he actually owed $500,000 more. It's a significant amount of money.
I can't even wrap my head around that right now. I'm thinking, well, what if it was me? Oh my God, I would die.
Right. Yeah, you think you have some amount of money and you're like, this is mine, and I'm going to eventually give my spouse this amount. And then you find out, oh, actually, you've been investing it for the both of you, so you need to just cut it in half. And yeah, you would just be like, what? I thought I had this $500,000 for myself, and now it's all gone. So it can, even if it might be legally theirs, if you're the person having to give up more than you realized, it is an emotional shock, like you said. Like most people would have a huge emotional impact if they have to give up $500,000 more than they realized because time has just marched on. And because like the way the interest rates or the stock market or whatever is going on, you find out that legally the other person is owed $500,000 more than you thought. That's a big shock.
Yes, and let's just advance this to cryptocurrency, which is so ridiculously volatile. So you have whatever you have in Bitcoin, crypto, the wallet, whatever you have in the wallet on the date of separation is supposed to be the number that you work with if you file quickly and start making those settlement decisions as quickly as possible. But with the volatility in something like that, you could have nothing. By the time you go to settlement, there's nothing to divide.
Exactly.
And the person who was going to get half of that may not even like crypto. And if you had done it quickly, that person may have sold it and reinvested and done well, but that option doesn't even exist anymore.
I would say, and I'm not like a financial advisor, but if you have stuff that should be split and you know it should be split 50-50, I would just go ahead and just divide it all up when you say you're going to separate, and then you can put it all into the marital settlement agreement saying that we're dividing these things up 50-50. But if you keep it and then you don't finish the paperwork for like 3-4 years, like you mentioned, and all of a sudden on the date of separation, it was worth $1 million and now is worth nothing, your soon to be ex can come after you and say, on the date of separation, this is what it was worth, so I want that, $500,000 from you, and now you're fighting because someone is saying, well, today it's zero, so you get zero, and they'll say, well, date of separation it was. So don't have that happen. Just give them the half. But if it's a clean 50-50, just split up the accounts so that you don't have this problem when you're finalizing divorce paperwork like years later.
I completely agree. In fact, I love the people when that say to me as we're going through disclosure forms, which I'm sure there are disclosure forms in every state, because that's how you know what you're going to be dealing with. I love when they say to me, oh, Judy, we've divided everything. I'm like, oh my God, thank you. This is great. I love you two people. Now life becomes really easy and all I have to do is write things down for you. I wanted to play devil's advocate on something that you said, and that was, okay, the person who should have gotten half of the crypto is the petitioner. This is something that the respondent's lawyer could argue. Well, why did you drag your feet? Why, petitioner, did you wait so long? You could have done it sooner.
Right.
There's so much that goes into the timing of everything. And I find something fascinating. So I have two current cases. Lovely, lovely people. They want to do the best for each other. One seriously is in a smaller financial situation, but they're the ones that waited 5, 6, 8 years. One person moves out. There's real estate. One person moves out, and they kind of took a year to make sure that this is what they wanted to do. So, applause to you. Congratulations for making sure. So, maybe we'll whittle this down to then 7 years. But once you were sure, it was 5 years before they came into my office to start the filing. And that was 3 years ago, almost 4 years ago now. And once we started the filing, well, Judy, we're just not really ready. So and so is sick. One person loses the job, somebody's sick, and what can you do? I can't do anything. It is your divorce, and you get to choose. But I would follow up every now and then and say, I'm just a little concerned about the timing. Are you really not ready? No, we're not. We'll call you when we're ready. Okay, then the court gets involved. Oh, then the court gets involved, Alice, and says, well, there are no hearings. You're not represented by attorneys. We look at this as more of an amicable divorce. We need you to finish. So the court then gets involved. The court only gives you so many chances to finish. Once the court says, here's your hearing date, I want to know why you're not finishing. And you tell them, and that's fine because the court hears everything and they understand it's hard. And, they're going to give you a break, 2 to 3 hearings. You go into your third and fourth hearing, you're going to get an angry judge who doesn't care anymore because the court does not want your paperwork around if you're not using the court services for trials and hearings. What's your response to that? You're smiling.
I mean, yeah, so you have to be careful about getting the courts because you don't want the courts to sort of run roughshod over your agency, your own agency, right? Because now you have a third party who is like involved in your life, involved in the whole thing. And so that makes it very unpleasant because yes, you have to file and all that. That's fine. I'm talking about them suddenly becoming like a parent figure in the divorce case, where now they are dictating, you have to do this, or we're going to do this, or we're going to cancel that, right? Because now you don't have the agency that you had previously if you had managed it appropriately between the two of you.
Yes.
Right? It's the same thing even with like child support or spousal support. Once the courts get involved, it's ugly. Because once the court gets involved, spousal support, okay, well, garnish your wages if you don't pay us, right? You have someone else constantly policing your life. And you don't want, like, no one wants to have that. You don't want to have some governmental agency looking deeply into your life, asking you to file paperwork, asking you to prove this or that, and, going after you if you didn't pay it. If you're late, they're like, sorry, we're just garnishing your wages, right? So you want to make sure that you do what you can do to hold on to your own agency so that you can make it move forward at your own time without getting the courts involved in your business, aside from just filing it without them just suddenly showing up saying, we're the police and we're going to like force you to do X, Y, and Z. Because that is very intrusive and it's not what you want.
No, it absolutely is not what you want. Now, let me, along with timing, go back to the importance and relevance of legal advice, understanding the law. Because even though, and I have, another case where, well, we just want to do what we want to do. Okay, that sounded fine 4 years ago, but right now you're arguing over spousal support. And by the way, you both canceled spousal support in the petition and the response. Had you gotten legal advice, we could have chosen a line, the right response, chosen the right option within spousal support to put it in a gray area. Let's wait and see. We're not really ready to decide. And that is an option. But what I find interesting, and again, it's a case I'm working with, and I really want this to turn out for both of them because they're such good co-parents. You know, they really are doing their best to work well with one another, but money's getting in the way. So it's been 8 years, going on 9, um, where they are now finally coming around to having the conversation about spousal support. Well, when you terminate it on your petition and response, you now need to ask the court if you can change that because the court considers what you write on your petition and your response very seriously. And you have just determined the rules of the road going forward on certain things, on community property, on custody for the kids, and on spousal support. So, yes, you can change, but you do need to ask the court's permission to change. That being said, if you don't understand that one person is not obligated to pay every single expense for the other person who may make less or not working, there comes a point where, and again, in a short-term marriage, there comes a point where you will have overspent, but you have life. So you may not be working this year, but maybe you're working that year. And it goes back and forth, and we make different amounts of money depending on our industry, depending on if we're accelerating in our industry or if the industry has been problematic and we need to look for another job. I mean, there's just so many considerations. And so I have a case where I'm happy to do it, actually. I'm looking forward to doing it because numbers interest me. But to run spousal support for each year based on their tax returns, what they each made, that's pretty simple. You don't need a forensic for that. You may need a forensic for other things. And then to backtrack what was spent on all the other expenses. It wasn't called spousal support because you just terminated it. But now you're looking at spousal support all of a sudden. And it's really easy to turn on your mediator or your paralegal and say, well, you should have told me this. No, we shouldn't.
Right.
No, it's been years before from the time you separated till you saw me. You should have educated yourself.
Right.
You know, so yes, we can kind of work it out. But that's the conundrum that not getting legal advice poses. And then, you know, you have to unravel it. So, and then, and I find this interesting. Just because you're an attorney doesn't mean you don't find yourself in an emotional situation where you're not dealing with the law. I don't know the exact way to say it, but you become your own worst client. So I have two people. One is a full-fledged attorney, great living, makes a great living, plenty of money, nobody has to worry. And the other person got her JD, but didn't really sit for the bar, so didn't become an attorney. But she did other things and earned money until they had kids. They didn't get legal advice. They didn't get legal advice. And one is a full-fledged attorney and the other, you know, is a JD. And so all I'm saying is emotions have their own intelligence. Emotions have their own logic. Emotions have their own control over you. So, you know, physician, heal thyself. You would think that any doctor would address their own health perfectly, but Alice, you're not old enough, I am, to remember going to a pediatrician who was smoking a cigarette in the office.
Oh, I remember. I remember. I had stitches getting put in my hand while she was blowing smoke in my face.
Oh my God. That is that is so funny. And so divorce is its own entity. It's its own world that we live in. And it doesn't matter what you do for a living. It doesn't matter how much money you make or don't make for a living. We are dealing with fear of the unknown, fear of the future, and beyond financial fear. You know, there are people, Alice, and I'm sure you've run into them, that have never lived alone.
Right.
And that's fearful. How will I do on my own? The silence of the house.
Or even if it's not alone, they more than likely never lived alone with children.
Right,
Right. Like
right.
maybe they lived alone by themselves before they had children, but most people going through a divorce have never lived alone with children they have to take care of, with children who rely on them. So
Mm.
that I think is very scary for everyone, because they're like, okay, we're breaking up our child's home. And how are we going to put the children back and forth? And I've had people who really struggle to think about a 2-2-3 custody arrangement, even though that is very common and it is recommended for younger children, simply because they feel like, well, I don't want to shuffle our kids back and forth. And
Mm.
I always tell them, if you don't want to shuffle your kids back and forth, the two of you can shuffle yourselves back and forth and have the
Ah,
kids stay in one house. But how many people do you think like actually will put their children before them to say, okay, I will live with this very inconvenient way where I'm going into the same house and then my spouse is, we're trading back and forth. Most people are like, no. So then they put it on their kids. As much as they say they don't want to do it, they are also not willing to say, I will do the 2-2-3 myself and I will move from one house to the other and we'll just trade houses. Like almost no one does that, even though they really don't want their kids to go back and forth either.
that's so hard. It's called nesting for all of
Yep.
you watching. It's called nesting, and it's incredibly hard to do because in a nesting situation, you have the family home, rented or paid for. Generally, they own the home, but you have the family home and you want to keep the kids there so the kids don't go back and forth. It's a wonderful idea. But you two have to occupy the same home, not at the same time, this
Exactly.
second home, but who's going to do the laundry? You stay in your same roles that you had when you were living together. One person ends up getting upset because they're cleaning and doing the laundry and doing the grocery shopping. Um, and then the stuff is around. You look at each other's
Right.
stuff. And part of the uncoupling process is to have just you be your own focus, other than the kids. But as an adult, you have to now grow and evolve in a different role. And that role is single parent or single person, but single parent, since we're talking about nesting, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
takes alone time to do it. You can't do it with your spouse's stuff in
Yeah.
front of you. And oh my God, he's never picked up after himself. Why doesn't she ever just clean up the dish? I mean, that's the same arguments, right?
Right.
Which is
Right.
so funny to hear.
And I
Um,
also want to bring up, Judith, the whole timing thing to go back to that. I have people who call me that are like, okay, we really want to get started. We're very anxious about getting started. So I think I'm going to file this week. And I'm like, hold on. Before you just run off to the court and file your divorce paperwork, I always ask them, is someone going to be refinancing? Is there a possibility? Or someone's going to go out and get
mm,
a loan? And so they will tell me sometimes, like, maybe, we don't know, we have to discuss it, but maybe. And I say, if it's a maybe, you need to be careful because once you file it, your opportunities to go refinance are limited to mainly private
oh,
lenders
good.
because most of the banks will say, oh, you're in a divorce? No, we're not refinancing, right? You can only refinance after the divorce is finalized. So if somebody wants that money or needs that money sooner, it could be 6 months to a year, whatever, however long it takes for you to finalize the divorce. And so I tell people, be very, very careful. If you need to refinance, you need to like think about the timing of filing because you don't want to file prematurely and then suddenly your access to refinance is now limited.
That is such a great point. That really is. That wasn't even on my radar right now. I really see it after the fact that they have no clue what refinancing means. Like I had one couple that said um, they were both on mortgage, both on title. Okay, folks, do not leave the title before you can leave the mortgage if you're the one getting bought out, because innocently something can happen to the spouse that's staying in the house and they can't pay the mortgage. You have to, but if your name's not on the title, you don't have that asset anymore. So,
Exactly.
so there's your warning. But Alice, such a great point. You are right. To refinance even in one person's name while still married is is the way to go.
Yes. Yes.
So see now I've turned around in how I think things should be. And I've met you and a couple other people that don't file but mediate. So obviously mediation comes first, and then you either refer me or somebody else to do the filing. I always thought the opposite. I always thought, well, let's start the filing to stop the community property and the community debt, and then we can regroup, do the disclosures, and mediate. But with this excellent point and the ease with which I can file, Alice, after you give your clients my name and number, it's so much easier to file once they've mediated. Now, that being said, you could forget something. I mean, that just does happen. Oh, that's right. We really didn't. Okay, so go back to Alice, have that discussion. You've seen me
Right.
do that before, and then come back to me and I'll finish writing your settlement agreement for you.
Exactly. Exactly. I always feel like the order should be get legal advice, then mediate, and then go file. Right? It doesn't have to
Yeah.
be that way, but I feel like it's the smartest way because
Yeah.
once you have legal advice, now you know you have your information so you can mediate it.
Yeah.
And that way you can determine whether you're going to refinance or not. And if you
Yeah.
are going to refinance, you do not move to filing immediately. You go and figure out, let me go talk to a mortgage broker, a mortgage banker, let me figure if I qualify, that sort of thing. And, these days, Judith, because not too long ago, there was like a 2.2%, mortgage interest. So right now I'm seeing a lot of people who are very loath to refinance because they're going to go from 2.2 to like 7%.
Yeah.
Right. And so they're like, I don't want to do that. However, there are some couples who say, okay, well, I'll stay on the mortgage for you. They need to understand that they have a liability for staying
Hmm.
on there. Not just what you talked about, which is if the spouse who's living in the house no longer can pay, now you're on the hook to pay. But also, there's just liability in general. If some contractor comes to the house and they get badly injured and they sue, even if you don't live there anymore, if your name is on that mortgage, you can be named in the lawsuit and they can come after you for damages.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of risk that you basically hold on to if you keep your name on the mortgage and the title.
Absolutely. That was actually a really good example. And I believe I'm now a convert, to be honest with you, with legal advice first, mediation second, file third. I really think just knowing you as much as I have, I guess about a year ago we met, and getting those mediation agreements, which by the way, folks, we don't file with the court. We don't file the mediation agreements. So it's a softer feel to sitting down and talking about things, and you can catch your breath because quite often we do our best at mediating, but we need time to reflect. We may not have thought of something for several months after the mediation is over. So if you mediate first and file second, in the course of filing, you get to have a second chance to say, can we just modify that a little bit, that decision that we made? Because I'm thinking of something else that we really didn't discuss, and it might benefit both people to reassess and make a modification on a decision that they already made.
Yeah,
So I, I,
exactly.
I I agree with Alice, everybody. I like that process. Um, Have you thought of anything else we haven't covered? I mean, there's so much to go over, but
You know, somebody
time.
recently told me, and it's not so much about timing, but it's something to consider because I was like, oh, I haven't really thought about that. If someone's doing a buyout, the other thing they need to consider is the escrow account. Who gets the escrow account?
What do you mean?
So the money that the it could be like the home insurance, like there's an escrow account when you're paying your mortgage, and so there's a pile of money sitting there, not maybe a few $1,000s,
Okay,
right? But if you're
right.
doing a buyout, who gets that account? The money that's in that account, is that divided 50-50? Does someone have to pay them, right? Or like you have to determine because that pile of money is sitting there. And so if you file all the information and you don't address the escrow account, the escrow account still has to be accounted for. Like who does it go to?
Okay,
Does it get split? That sort of thing. So,
yeah.
I want to urge people to think about if there's a buyout, where does the money go that's sitting in the escrow account? It
Okay,
pays for your property taxes. It might pay for your property insurance, the
yeah.
PMI. Yeah.
No, that was an excellent point. And then to further that point, I started thinking while you were talking, well, wait a minute. If you mediate first, you'll find out whether you can buy the other person out.
Right.
So people don't, especially if it's their first home, they don't really understand the lending rules until you're in it. And you may not be able to ever buy somebody out. You may have put yourself, maybe bankruptcy. Well, I don't know how long. I mean, 7 years I keep, there's different kinds of bankruptcy and they come with different amounts of time to recover. So, depending on that, if you filed bankruptcy and you're the one that wants to buy your spouse out, you really need to know that before you start filing because that will completely change settlement terms. If you can't do it for 10 years, I don't know, just to grab a number, and your spouse doesn't want to wait that long, buying
Right.
buying out is not the option. Selling might be the option. And something else people don't understand, and that is, making somewhere in six figures, of course, who doesn't want to be there, right? You know, it depends on where you are in six figures. If you're at 110 and 120 and you're on the mortgage and you're the one being bought out, hold on a minute.
No, you're doing the buying out.
You're doing the buying out. Oh, no, no, no. Here's where I wanted to go with it. Sorry about that. You're okay with letting your spouse take years. Do you understand?
Right.
You
Yes.
can't buy another home on your own now
Yeah.
because you're tied up
Yeah.
into a
Exactly.
mortgage and you don't, I mean, making 130 is great, but it doesn't allow you to buy two pieces of real estate in an expensive state.
Yes. And the other thing too is if you are staying in the house and you make these agreements, people have to realize they can't just easily call the bank and say, can you take my spouse off the mortgage because we're getting a divorce? It doesn't work like that, right? So that's something to keep in mind, that it is not as easy as calling the bank. You do have to qualify for a refinance. There's something called a loan assumption.
Right?
Most banks don't do it, and they especially don't want to do it. That basically is when you call the bank and say, hey, by the way, take my spouse off. So you're assuming the loan. So I talked to some brokers and I asked them, like, how often does this happen? And their answer is not very often, because the banks are not going to make money if they just say yes to the loan assumption because you're keeping some
Right.
low interest rate. They want to make
Right.
money. The other thing is, even if you do a loan assumption, you still have to qualify for that loan. So if you don't have a job because you're a stay-at-home mom or what have you, right, you won't qualify for the loan assumption. So I'm letting your listeners know that there is such a thing that exists. You can always ask your bank,
Mhm.
hey, like, can I do this? What do I need to do to qualify? But it is like a slim portion of people who can actually get that done.
Yeah.
But it does exist, right?
Yes. And one of my clients brought in a page from her friend's divorce settlement agreement. And she said, Judy, can't we do this? Can't we structure our situation in the house like this? Because she was able to qualify for the loan. And I said, you see the words promissory note? That means she didn't she didn't get his name off the loan. She can't. I'm going to guess she's not working or just started to work. So the promissory note was that tip off. Some years ago, I attended a family law conference where we were talking about child and spousal support and the house was a big deal. And it was a panel of judges. And I love when judges talk. They get real tough on attorneys. I was one of the few non-attorneys in the room because that's how you get educated. You have to be with the people to get the most amount of education. I don't give legal advice. I'm not allowed. But at least I know when I'm listening to somebody talk whether they're speaking correctly.
Right.
So here's what the judges said. They said, you cannot indebt a third party, and they're talking about the mortgage company,
Of course.
in this agreement
Yeah.
where if something happens, the
Yeah.
loan company has to accept these
Yeah.
decisions.
Yeah.
Doesn't work like
Doesn't
that.
work. Doesn't work because they never signed it. If a party is never there to sign anything, they're not part of that agreement. So yeah, so you're completely correct that a divorcing couple cannot say if the in spouse, meaning the one in the house, cannot pay the mortgage, the bank agrees not to go after the other spouse. Like
Yes.
people want to do that. I'm like, yeah, sorry, that doesn't work because this is not an agreement with the bank. So the bank will still go after that. So you can't make agreements like that.
No, that was so funny. God, Alice, I'm so happy I had nothing when I got divorced. I'm so happy. It was so easy. There were no kids. We owned nothing. We both worked. We made equal money. It was just an emotional divorce, and then we were done. It was paperwork. That was it.
Yeah.
So
we had kids, but we didn't have any property that we owned, so it was fine too. We didn't use lawyers. We didn't even use mediators. It was just like, well, let's figure out the custody schedule, and that was it. There was no alimony. There was a teeny little tiny bit of child support, and that was it.
yeah. Yeah, no, it's fascinating. So, my heart goes out to everybody, of course. When you yourself have been through the situation, whether it was tough or not tough, you at least understand that even though it may not have been financially tough like you and I had, it's still emotionally tough. You still go through a life-changing situation. You still have to have some self-awareness. Why did this happen? A, should I even have gotten married? Did I not listen to myself? We do that all the time. We don't follow our gut. Um, or just we thought it was the right thing, it didn't work out, but so many things can get in the way, or so many things are factors to the self-awareness step that people have to go through in the timing of their divorce. And I just come back to timing is everything.
Absolutely.
Timing
Yes.
is everything. Well, I think we did well. I like our discussion a lot. I love talking about this. Any last thoughts at all before we say goodbye?
Well, I'm going to just plug prenups and postnups, Judith, because as
Oh,
divorce mediators, we know what happens when there's no prenup and postnup. It can kind of get ugly. And I just want to dispel the myth that people think that if they don't have any money, they don't need a prenup or a postnup. It really shouldn't be about your money that you have before you get married because that's your separate property. It's about everything that you're going to gain together as a couple, right? Whatever property you buy, whatever house you buy, whatever business you create. So I beg people that after they get their divorce and they're thinking about getting married again, please create a prenup, or even if you're married, consider creating a postnup, because it's about the property that you gain while you're in the marriage together. It is not about what you had before.
okay.
Right?
I couldn't agree with you more. Um, when people call me to write prenups, I say I can't. Only lawyers should be writing prenups because the law changes so much. And plus, you have to be legally responsible. And, as a paralegal, legal document assistant, and mediator, no, I can't be at that level of legal responsibility. And God knows I don't want to be. I mean, that's heavy duty stuff. So with the prenup, if you're in a community property state, anything you had before is separate property anyway, as
Right.
long as it can be documented. You don't really need the prenup for that. So when
Exactly.
people come to me, I agree with you. When people come to me, I say, I can mediate the terms of your prenup, and then I can give you two lawyers. You each get a lawyer, and they write it up for you so it could have legal force behind it.
Right.
I interviewed a woman, and I'm sorry I can't remember her name, Lori, and I can't remember her last name. She wrote a great book on prenups. And she said a prenup should never completely disadvantage one spouse. It has to be a kind prenup. Before I even interviewed her, when I got into the mediations, I said just really what you said. It's about going forward. It's easy to document when you started the 401k, when you bought those stocks. That's really easy. But going forward, what are your terms and conditions for creating community property? So that's
Yeah.
in community property state. But then you have the equal distribution of assets states. Oh, the rule, I don't even know what the rules are on those states. It doesn't matter what you had before. There was a show on this with an attorney presiding over a mediation, and it was an equitable distribution of assets state. I was in shock at what she was telling one of the spouses they had to give up, which is something they had years before the marriage. I'm like, oh my God, this really exists?
So in those states, you definitely need to have a prenup because you want to make sure you're protecting your assets. And while they can always be challenged in court, at least you have something that you have down to try to have it be a working like agreement between the two of you. Because as you know, Judith, as a mediator helping people get through a divorce, if they don't have that prenup or a postnup, it is so difficult to untangle all of the things that they entangled themselves into during the time of the marriage. And the longer they've been together, the hardest. Just for an example, here's a very common example, is when someone inherits money from parents to put for a down payment of the house, and it's initially gifted as here's the money for the two of you. And when they're exiting the marriage into a divorce, the wife or the husband says, that was my parents. So
Yeah.
that money should be mine. So I would like that $100,000 back as my money because it came from my parents. That is very, very common. And so without the prenup, if you have a nice spouse, they will say, sure, I'll acknowledge that was from your parents and okay. If they're fighting, they're going to be like, no, that was gifted to both of us. I want half. And it's off to the races after that, right?
Yeah, I just want to follow the law. Um,
Right.
so you have the prenup. Now you have to follow it. How many times have you seen? And I had this was interesting. This was years ago. His family was great at investing in real estate and stocks and other kinds of investments. She wasn't. She didn't have that kind of a family, and she didn't have that skill and talent, but she always worked and made a good living. Well, the prenup was very clear about what was and was not going to happen. But somehow they put the prenup aside, and he took some of her stuff and invested it for her. Now we have a ton of community property, don't we?
Yes. 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 So, and
So,
you can always amend it to say, hey, we did this and this is what we expect to
yeah.
happen. So just know that you want to have your own business contract with one another, because if you don't, you're going to inherit the state's business contract.
Yes. And in the world of timing is everything, if you're going to do a prenup, you don't do it the night before the wedding
No.
or a week before the wedding. No, you want to talk about something not standing. A lawyer can easily argue against that, easily. I'm hearing 2 months. What's your understanding of how far in advance of the wedding should the prenup be signed?
I don't know exactly on that point, Judith, but I do want to say that you want it to be long enough where people can have long conversations, maybe mediations about it.
Yeah.
I have seen too many times where people don't want to have a prenup because they don't want to discuss these difficult things. So people go
Hard.
in with expectations or assumptions such as, well, if I ever get a divorce, I'm just going to go take half of his stuff or her stuff. But they don't want to divulge that for fear that the marriage will not happen. The
Mm.
wedding day will be canceled, right? Or someone may have a business and maybe the spouse thinks, well, I'm going to take half of however much that business grows. Whereas the other person who has a business thinks to themselves, and they don't want to say it out loud, no, my business is mine. I'm never going to give any amount of it, right? Because those conversations can potentially end the relationship if people dig their heels in. So I've seen a lot of times where people do not want to tell their current or future spouse their own intentions that are locked away in here in case they ever get a divorce. So that's a little, telling and scary.
You know, I don't know how I would handle it if I was asked for a prenup. I mean, that's a tough conversation to have because you're in love, it's all emotional. And I would say the average person, unless I'm just living in another reality, I would say the average person is not looking to take advantage of their soon-to-be spouse. They certainly want to marry somebody comfortable. You don't want to marry somebody who has a horrible earning record, you know. So, it's nice to marry somebody who's successful, who, has an idea where they want to go in life. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that. But then you can feel diminished if you're not that spouse who's earning more, or that person who's not earning more money. It's a tough conversation to have all the way around, but I support your point in that it's about money. If you don't want to deal with money, don't get married. Don't get married. Marriage is okay. Marriage is a business contract.
It
That's
is.
what it is. And
It
it's
is.
all about money. The,
It is.
the reason why you go to a courthouse or some official government place to get a marriage license is because you are now entering the state's
Yes.
contract on money and
Yes.
how money is handled in this formal business relationship.
Exactly. That's what a marriage license is. It's a business license between two people who are in love.
So, not to hurt our business, Alice, but don't get married then. Get married if, I mean, here's what I say to people, and actually people are starting to agree. If you're not going to have children, unless your religion or your culture kind of dictates that you should get married, and that's very important. These are important parts of people's lives, then okay, you're going to get married. But if you're not going to have kids and your culture or your religion don't dictate, maybe think twice because you're entering the world of the government controlling your money.
Right. Exactly. They have laws set up, and those laws, and even with a prenup or postnup, someone can challenge their prenup or postnup and
That
try to go,
too.
yeah.
That too. So, I'm not getting married, Alice. How about you?
No, I am not getting married. I've been married already, and that's not happening anymore.
But I love being in couples. So, nothing wrong with that. That's a lot of fun. Alice, it's always a lot of fun talking to you. And I always learn as long as I've been doing this for many, many years, but I still learn when I talk to you. And I love that. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on, Judith. This is a lot of fun.
Always. All right, you'll come back. This is her second time. You know she's going to come back. So, thank all of you for listening. I know you got a lot out of this because this was an important episode. Thank you for listening, and I will see you soon. Take care.